What is the dumbest thing you got punished for in school? A teacher in my school said that Orlando was the state capital of Florida. I corrected him. He raised an eyebrow and said, "I think you'll find I'm right," before continuing. I said, "No, sir, it's definitely Tallahassee." His retort of, "I'm the one with the degree in geography," was met with "then you'd think you'd know," landed me in detention.
That's kind of wild. It's funny how a small correction can lead to detention. Teachers usually don't like being called out, even if they're wrong. I had a similar situation once, where I pointed out a mistake in class, and the teacher didn't take it well. Sometimes it's better to keep quiet, right? Just shows how stubborn people can be, especially when it comes to their knowledge.
When I was 12, I became ill and had to take time off school. I was off for 3 months straight before going back on a part-time timetable. The slightest bit of exercise would leave me exhausted. I lost weight from not being able to eat, and I looked terrible. So why did I get into trouble? For not taking part in cross-country running. I wasn't alone that day. The girl with a broken leg also got into trouble.
That sounds rough. Being sick for that long is tough, especially at that age. It's crazy how schools can be about participation, even when things are clearly not right. I remember a similar situation where a friend got called out for not attending gym class due to a sprained ankle. It's interesting how schools can miss the bigger picture sometimes. Glad you got through it though.
Got suspended for responding to the prompt. What one item would you bring with you if you were a pioneer on the Oregon Trail? With a rifle and bullets. I was in the 3rd grade. Dad took me squirrel hunting on the day I was suspended. Turned out better than expected. Edit. I think it's worth mentioning the teacher in question was only there for a year before the school fired her for the numerous complaints from parents. I was only one of many students she punished for silly reasons like that. Edit 2. No, it wasn't because I said 2 items. One of the rules of the activity is that we could bring additional items if those items were required to make the first item work and wouldn't be very useful on their own, bullets. I was suspended because she told administration that I had discussed inappropriate matters in class by referencing hunting.
That's a wild story. Getting suspended for something like that seems over the top. But it sounds like your dad made it a good day anyway. Squirrel hunting must have felt like a better adventure than school. It's tough when teachers don't get the kids' perspective, especially when the rules are kind of vague. At least you got some fun memories out of it.
In high school, the year I got there was the year they instituted a rule that you had to display your ID at all times while at school. If you didn't have your ID out, you could get detention. Due to reasons, I got to school about an hour before first bell and had zero way of getting back home or getting anything from home. Well, until the end of school, of course. So I get to school and realize, oh noes, I forgot my ID at home. Well, no problem, I'll just go to the office and get a temp one. Well, turns out I should have tried to make it through the day without my ID because I got detention anyway. And I knew that I had a greater than 95% chance of making it through the day without anyone who cared noticing I didn't have my ID out. But no, I tried to do the right thing. Well, fuck you, school. You taught me a terrible lesson.
That really sums up some classic high school nonsense. Trying to do the right thing and still getting punished is frustrating. I remember a similar thing happening where I thought being honest would pay off, but it just led to more hassle. It teaches you not to bother sometimes. Schools have some strange policies that end up backfiring on students. You just have to roll with it after a while.
I went to an extremely conservative Baptist high school in Guam. I was punished for some pretty insane things. Hair being too spiky, singing Feliz Navidad during Christmas time, too worldly of a song, and getting caught with DVDs of mainstream movies. I was eventually expelled when a group of the super religious students sold me out for drinking a beer at a friend's birthday party on a weekend. At this time, the drinking age in Guam was 18. I was 18 when drinking said beer.
That sounds like a pretty intense experience. It's wild how strict some schools can be. Getting expelled for drinking a beer when you're of legal age seems really harsh. I guess the pressure from those super religious students made it worse. It's a rough time when you just want to enjoy being a teenager. Those memories probably stuck with you, though. Not the usual high school vibe most people have.
In third grade, my mom had me do some experimental ADD medication thing that caused a bunch of weird tics and shit. Apparently, I kept making some face because my teacher drew 3 stars on a post-it note, and whenever I made the face, she crossed off a star. I lost all 3 and got 3 days in detention for recess. Plot twist, I didn't actually have ADD.
That sounds pretty rough. Getting put on medication that you didn't actually need is a pretty wild experience. I can imagine how frustrating it must have been to get detention for something out of your control. At least you learned about how tricky adult decisions can be, even when it comes to kids. It's a strange situation, but it probably made you stronger somehow.
I once coughed in an exam, and the invigilator thought I said pedo when I did it. Fast forward 6 months, and before mentioned teacher gets asked to leave, and it emerges he had been getting way too friendly with young students. Funny thing is that I genuinely just coughed. Methinks he may have had a guilty conscience.
That's an interesting story. It's wild how a simple cough can lead to such a big situation. It's almost like life has a way of revealing the truth when you least expect it. The whole scenario shows how perception can twist reality. Definitely makes you think about what happens behind closed doors in schools.
I got detention for saying okay to my home economics teacher in middle school. Seriously, we were in class and she asked me to do something and I replied politely, okay. The teacher has a detention board and a day later I see my first name on it. I have a very common name and, joking with her, went haha that's for me right. She said it was. I asked her what I did, and she said it was because I replied okay to her when she asked me to do something, and she hates when people do that. She just wants them to do it. I was stunned. I told her I wasn't going to detention. I got home and told my mom what happened. My teacher's son was in the same grade as my older sister, so my mom knew the teacher. She ended up calling her, and the teacher apparently was fumbling over her words, trying to justify the detention. The next day, she goes to me, "You served this detention, right?" As a wink-wink, nudge-nudge type of thing. I said no, and I'm not going to. She goes, "No, you served it right." I decided to just say sure, and that was that.
That sounds frustrating. It's wild how a simple word can lead to detention. I had a similar experience in school, where a teacher overreacted to something small. I think it's funny how these little moments stick with us. Your mom stepping in is classic though. Sometimes teachers can have their quirks, and it's cool when parents know them well enough to intervene. Just goes to show, you have to pick your battles.
I got an in-school suspension for not attending an optional assembly. Not only that, but because I was suspended, I got kicked out of the National Honor Society. I had my teacher sign permission to stay in his room. We had a new principal who was trying to establish dominance. I've never hurt anyone, but I really wanted to punch his smug face.
That's a rough situation. You'd think they'd consider context when handing out punishments. Ignoring a permission slip from a teacher, especially for something optional, seems a bit harsh. It's frustrating when authority figures prioritize power over reason. I get the anger towards the principal. Sometimes they just want to make a point, and it gets real unnecessary. Just good to vent about it, I guess.
For me, it was whole class detentions. I was always the quiet kid who would get on with work and was rarely disruptive in class. Most of the teachers were well aware of this. But sometimes I would end up in detention because some people were misbehaving and the teacher simply held the entire class back, including the well-behaved ones. It happened quite a few times and I really hated it. The justification was that the good kids would pressure the bad kids. Somehow, how teachers thought a shy, quiet kid like me could pressure the class dickheads to keep quiet, I really don't know.
I can relate. I was the quiet one too, just trying to get through classes. It's frustrating when the whole class gets punished for a few troublemakers. I remember sitting in detention, watching time crawl, thinking about how unfair it was. Those moments just felt pointless. Honestly, it didn't teach anyone a lesson, it just made the troublemakers laugh more. I guess we all had to deal with that nonsense somehow.
First year of high school. Only been at the school for about 7 or 8 weeks, and I got sent to the focus room, what we call detention pretty much, for wearing black socks instead of blue or white. I went to a public high school, and it was the principal that saw me, and she had to literally get on her hands and knees to check the color.
That's a pretty wild start to high school. Getting sent to detention for something like sock color seems a bit over the top. I can't believe the principal actually went to the trouble of checking like that. Just shows how strict some schools can be. It's funny to think back on those kinds of rules now. A memorable way to kick off your high school experience, for sure.
Nothing. My 4th grade teacher was deliberately giving me lower grades for no real apparent reason. My dad actually took a night to calculate the grades I was making with all the homeworks and tests and things I had, and said I was actually making As and BS. Edit. Now I think about it, this was the same woman that had a problem with me reading ahead and completing tasks in the textbooks we had. I was bored or just saw things I could already do, mostly.
It's rough when teachers don't see your potential. I had a similar experience in school where a teacher just didn't get it. I was doing well, but they kept pushing back on me for no real reason. It felt frustrating. You just want to learn and move ahead, but sometimes the system doesn't work that way. It's a strange place when your effort doesn't match the grades.
My French teacher did not like me for some reason I could never guess. Anyway, one day during her exam, she came to my desk and accused me of cheating when I wasn't doing anything wrong. So, I protested and said I am not cheating. She then proceeded to take away my sheet and asked me questions on test verbally. I replied correctly to all her questions. Now that she knew that she got nothing on me, she wrote -5 on my sheet because of me daring to protest.
That sounds pretty rough. It's weird how some teachers can have it out for certain students. I guess you've got to stand your ground sometimes, even when it feels unfair. Getting marked down just for speaking up is a bit frustrating. It must have felt good to answer her questions right, though. At least you knew you weren't in the wrong. It's just unfortunate she didn't see it that way.
When I was in 4th grade, I was given detention for reading books too quickly. The teacher had divided the books by difficulty, and she thought I was stupid, so she put me at the lowest reading level, even though I was one of the smarter students in the class. I finished all of the books within the course of about 2 weeks. When I told her that I was finished with them and would like to start reading the more difficult books, she called me a liar and gave me a week's worth of detention, claiming there was no way that I could have read and understood those books so fast. I saw her a few years ago, and she was surprised that I'm on the dean's list at my college, let alone at the college I'm attending. I'm graduating from college next year with the intention on going to medical school. I think I can fucking read.
That's an interesting experience. It's surprising how teachers can sometimes misjudge students. Getting detention for reading too fast seems a bit odd. It's good to see that you've proven her wrong. Being on the dean's list is impressive. Sounds like you've come a long way and have some solid goals for the future. Graduating and aiming for medical school is no small feat. You definitely have the skills.
Got punished for being punished. Teacher kicked me out because I was a minute late, honestly. So I was chilling outside the class when the principal walks by and gives me an earful about delinquency and indiscipline. Real douchebag, had to stick up his ass at the time and threatened to call my parents. Starts spouting bullshit on the phone. So I interrupted and told him that he cannot speak to my parents in such a way, especially when he is not speaking the truth. Gets frustrated and suspends me for 2 days. I have no idea what was wrong with him, but I enjoyed those 2 days.
Sounds like a rough deal. Getting kicked out for being late is tough enough, but then having the principal come down on you must have felt unfair. Honestly, standing up to him was brave. Not many would do that. At least you got some days off, which probably felt like a win. It's funny how sometimes the punishment turns into a little break.
Age 10, year 5 in England. About 100 of us are sat in the main hall having a music lesson. So she's trying to teach everyone to sing in rounds. I think that's what it's called, where you overlap lines with previous line, etc. Anyway, we're doing a part that requires a few of us to sing in harmony. And much like J.K. Simmons in Whiplash, she notices someone is singing flat. She eventually whittles it down to me, and in front of everyone she says, "No. It's like this. Aheawaha in C. Me. A teacher. No. Hey, me. A dash teacher. Right? Well, if you're going to waste my time, I will waste yours." I spend my lunch break standing outside the staff room, staring at the floor. I cannot sing. End of. I hate singing now, and I largely blame this on that stupid teacher that couldn't tell the difference between a kid being an arsehole and one with no talent. Thanks, Mrs. Hammond.
That sounds rough. I can relate to having a teacher who just doesn't get it. I remember in school, I struggled with math. One time the teacher made an example out of me in front of the class. I felt so embarrassed and just wanted to disappear. After that, I lost interest in math completely. Some teachers don't realize their impact on us, for better or worse. It's frustrating.
I remember having a really shitty 4th grade teacher who sent me to the principal's office because I told her I didn't understand what the math question was asking. She asked me what part 1 didn't understand. I said all of it. She said I was lying and then punished me for it. On the bright side, the principal said I did nothing wrong and just let me hang out with her for the rest of the day.
That sounds rough. It's funny how adults sometimes misinterpret kids. A simple question turned into a bigger issue. At least the principal had your back. It's good you got to spend the day with someone who actually listened. Those experiences stick with you, showing how important understanding can be in teaching. Sometimes, the tough moments lead to better ones later.
I was once told I was not allowed to use the restroom. I was in a career in tech program during high school where I would go to another school for half a day. From there, I would ride a bus to our middle school. I would then wait for my bus to go home. One day, as I was waiting for the bus, I went to go use the bathroom. I was stopped by the vice principal and told I was not allowed to enter the building. I am not an argumentative guy, so I say nothing. I then wait till when she is not near the entrance, and I walk into the principal's office. Told him what had happened. He told me it was ridiculous and it would not happen again. It in fact did not happen again.
That's kind of a weird situation. Just waiting for the bus and then getting stopped like that. It's good you talked to the principal about it. Not everyone would speak up, but you did. It probably made things easier for you and maybe even for others. Sometimes people just don't think about how rules affect everyone. Glad it worked out in the end.
When I was in elementary school, the teacher failed to arrive on time to the class, so I got bored and made the class form a line, told them since the teacher wasn't there we were going to recess. They all followed and agreed. I was the mastermind behind the whole operation, so my parents got called and I was suspended for a day.
That sounds like a classic kid move. I can picture you just standing up and taking charge. It's funny how quickly kids can rally together for something like recess. I guess you thought you had it all figured out until the call home. A one-day suspension is a bit of a badge of honor in that case. Definitely a memorable moment from school.
standing near the end of the line. After recess and lunch break in grade 5, we had to line up to re-enter the school. I was near the back, and after about half the line made it back into school, the on-duty teacher stopped the line because the guys now at the front were causing some sort of ruckus. By the time those of us behind the ruckus were let in, we were a few minutes late for class. My teacher, Mr. Binder, yes, for real, had a temper. While the other teachers accepted why some kids were late, Mr. Binder kept all of us that were late in for detention at the next lunch break. Another Mr. Binder story. Everyone in my class had a 30-minute slot on the classroom computer each week. My slot on this particular day came right after we got back from music class. Since it was my turn, I went over to the computer. The monitor was off, so thinking that the computer was also off, I hit the power button, which turned off the computer, which made Mr. Binder lose his work, and therefore his shit.
That's a classic school story. I remember similar times getting in trouble just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Detention felt unfair, especially when it wasn't even your fault. And having a teacher like Mr. Binder must have been tough. It's wild how one little action, like hitting the wrong button, can make everything spiral. Those moments really stick with you. School was just filled with random chaos like that.
I got sent to the principal's office for something my twin sister did. We are not identical. The principal was trying to accuse me of collaborating with her and her friends, but the truth was, me and her hung around way different groups of people. He had me in tears by the time I went home. I told my mom about it, and she called him up and chewed his ass out. He never bothered me again.
That's rough. Getting in trouble for something someone else did is tough. It's good your mom stood up for you, though. It must have felt nice to have someone in your corner. At least after that, the principal knew not to mess with you again. It's interesting how people can assume things without knowing the whole story.
I got accused for cheating on my 6th grade English class test because I used words that the average 6th grade doesn't know. The principal had to call my mother and set up a meeting. My mother replied with, "I am sorry my son is too advanced for your school because he likes to read books on his free time." Yeah, I got expelled from that school by the end of the year, but that was for fighting a kid that bullied me. Hated that school, hated that teacher.
Sounds like a rough experience. It's tough to be called out for something that you thought was just showing your skills. Your mom seemed to have your back, at least. Getting expelled for standing up to a bully isn't right either. Seems like that school wasn't really equipped to handle kids who are a bit different.
In high school, I got detention for refusing to be the student of the day. During student of the day, you would sit in the office and do random stuff that they tell you to do. Vacuuming and picking up rubbish are the first things that come to mind. You would actually get pulled out of class for the whole day to do this shitty job for the school. Apparently me caring about my learning wasn't good enough.
I remember something similar. In middle school, we had this thing where certain kids had to clean up during lunch. I was pulled into it once and just stood there, refusing to do the work. My teacher got annoyed and I ended up in detention too. It was weird thinking they valued cleanup more than actually learning. Guess some things never change in schools.
In high school, I had a camera confiscated and the administration wrote me up and threatened to suspend me for breaking their policy on video cameras, phones, and other distracting technology. I was the photographer for the student newspaper, and the camera I was using was the school's property, not my personal camera. A few weeks later, the cafeteria was used for a commercial without any notice to students or teachers. I think it was for lunch meat. They had 3 to 4 large cameras, and they brought in paid actors instead of using actual students as extras. They ended up filming during lunchtime, so no actual students had any place to eat. After hearing all of the complaints and talking to my newspaper advisor, I had the camera again and went to take pictures of the commercial and the displaced students in the hallway, only to have it confiscated and written up again.
That situation sounds pretty frustrating. You were just trying to do your job, and it's kind of wild that they used the cafeteria for a commercial without any heads up. It's like they didn't even consider the students' needs at all. Getting your camera taken twice for the same reason must have felt ridiculous, especially when they were filming with their fancy equipment. It's just a weird double standard.
Not me, but my brother. There was a kid with known anger issues in his form in secondary school. My brother was a smartass in school and wound the kid up occasionally, but this time he swore blind that he didn't say anything to annoy him. Anyway, angry kid shoves my brother head first into a fire extinguisher while they were waiting outside the IT room. The teacher turns around and sees my brother on the floor. He just took it and didn't retaliate, and sends him to the head of year. My brother got an internal suspension because the kid tried to kick the shit out of him. The next day, he turns up to the exclusion desks, bolted to the walls outside the staff room, with a black eye and a strongly worded letter from my mom, and they realized that they had the wrong kid. Another time, they made him do a 2-hour English literature exam with a broken hand. His friend had stood on it by accident during the break, and when he told the teacher that he thought it was broken, they thought he was taking the mick. My mom took him to the hospital later that day, and he had 2 broken fingers.
Sounds rough for your brother. It's kinda wild how things can escalate in school. He didn't even fight back when the kid shoved him, and still ended up getting in trouble. Getting a black eye and a letter from your mom would definitely turn heads though. And being made to take a test with a broken hand? That's just not right. Seems like he really got the short end of the stick.
I got in school suspension for being late 4 times in the same semester. In other words, I missed about 20 minutes of school total, which was corrected by having me miss 8 hours of school. We were required to write Breakfast Club-style essays, in which I pointed out this horrible logic and was rewarded by another day of suspension.
That's a rough situation. Getting suspended for being late just a few times seems pretty harsh. Writing essays in a quiet room isn't exactly a punishment that fits the crime either. It's interesting how schools handle these things sometimes. You can see the flaws in the system clearly, but they don't seem to care. I guess it's just one of those experiences you laugh about later.
My wife's brothers, twins, got in trouble in 1st grade for drawing too many penguins. Seriously, the teacher said they drew penguins too much and they had to draw something else. They were like 6 and didn't understand and drew more penguins, so the teacher sent a note home to their dad. Their dad took them out of the school and got them into a charter school.
That's an interesting story. It's funny how kids can get in trouble for something so simple. Imagine being 6 and just loving penguins. Switching schools over that seems a bit drastic, but I guess the dad wanted to support their interests. Kids' imaginations can be a lot of fun, and it's a shame when that gets stifled. Sounds like their dad really had their backs though.
This was last year, freshman in high school, in the cafeteria. Kid puts me in a chokehold and pulls me to the ground. I don't react because you can hardly call it a chokehold. The kid's weak as shit and half my size. Teachers come rushing over asking if he is okay, and yells at me for pushing the kid to the ground. He gets a trip to the nurse, I got a trip to the principal's, and the next day, I get an in-school suspension. No idea why the kid did this, and I have like 20 people defending me, saying it was his fault, but all the teachers so think it's me because I landed on the kid, I push him to the ground and pinned him down if you ask a teacher.
Sounds like a rough situation. You were just minding your own business, and then out of nowhere, that kid goes after you. It's wild how quickly things can turn. It's frustrating when everyone sees what really happened, but the adults don't listen. Getting sent to the principal for defending yourself is just messed up. Sometimes it feels like the rules are upside down in those moments. Just gotta shake it off and move on, I guess.
I got detention only once in high school. See, freshman year we had a brand new high school building, so there were strict no food/only water rules in effect that pretty much everyone ignored by senior year. especially my English teacher, who didn't care if students showed up with mugs of tea. On that fateful day, I borrowed a tea bag from a friend who was also going to do tea, but we got spotted by a teacher in the hall who saw I had tea and ordered me to dump it out. She saw my friend's mug, but friend insisted it was just water, and the tea hadn't gone through yet, so it looked like dirty water, definitely not clear. So she was scot-free, but I just kept walking to the classroom promising I would dump out said tea in the water fountain, but of course didn't. Anyway, this teacher blew a gasket that I disrespected her, so I got detention. I know, I was clearly a wild, out-of-control kind of teenager.
It's always the little things. I remember when a friend got caught sneaking snacks into class. We were just trying to enjoy some chips during a boring lecture. The teacher spotted her and flipped. She played it cool, claiming it was just noise from her bag. I didn't help much, just sat there laughing. In the end, she got detention. Definitely made the rest of that week pretty quiet.
Here we go. This is the biggest bullshit ever. We had a teacher last year. Let's call her Sarath. Anyway, me and my friends were sitting in the lovely sun. This is Ireland, so it's rare, and we were lazily throwing rocks at a pole. Sarath comes over and tells us that if we throw another rock, gravel rocks by the way, she'd send the person to the principal's office. I drop a rock that I had in my hand, because I'm a fucking angel. Then I'm sent to the office anyway for disobeying. TL, DR, throwing rocks. Teach says stop. Drop rock in hand. Teach gets mad.
That sounds pretty frustrating. It's funny how sometimes the rules don't make sense. You were just enjoying some sun and minding your own business. The teacher probably had a bad day or something. It's wild how a simple thing like dropping a rock could land you in trouble. I guess it's all about perspective. Just another one of those random school moments.
I had a psych teacher in high school play that number game where you pick a number between 1 and 10. Then multiply, add, subtract, and it comes back to the same number. She asked if anyone's number didn't come back to the same one. I raised my hand, and she asked what number I picked. I said pi. She flipped, yelling about how she couldn't believe someone would pick a decimal and such. She sent me to the principal's office, and my defense held. It's a number between 1 and 10, so WTF teach. I got sent back to class with an amazing shit-eating grin.
That's a solid story. Your teacher must have been having a tough day. Picking pi definitely isn't what she expected. The way you turn that situation around with confidence is pretty funny. It's always interesting to see how some teachers respond to unexpected answers. Getting that grin while walking back to class must have felt good. Just goes to show that rules aren't always black and white.
Everyone in the school got punished for wearing socks with logos, Nike, Adidas, ECT, on them. I went to a Catholic school until 8th grade, and the same nun had been principal of the school for most of that time. We obviously had a pretty strict uniform to abide by, but for whatever reason, she had a true disdain for socks with logos on them. So, at one of her school assemblies, she spent about 10 minutes talking about the dress code, and awful we are to be wearing socks and not respecting the dress code. Well, as the mature Catholic children we are, nearly all students agree to wear knee-high socks with logos on them. Roughly 15 minutes into our coup, the principal comes to each classroom individually and goes absolutely nuts. A tear-filled tirade about socks to each classroom that all other classrooms can hear through thin walls. It was glorious. She never came back after that day.
That's a wild story. I remember a similar thing happening at my school. We had strict rules, too, and everyone would push the limits. One time, they made a big deal over t-shirts with small logos. We all started wearing them just to test the waters. The teachers were frustrated, but it felt kind of like a little rebellion. Things got tense, but after some time, they just let it go. It's funny how these rules can spark such reactions.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.